said that the only constructor we had for our form, okay, if we go back to our form, okay, here's our form. We had a default constructor, okay? Or for chart display, which is really what we're going to be interested in, we have this form, and we had seen that when we think about, again, this particular form, which is our starter form, okay, our start form, which is this guy. Someone had to create it. We did it, okay? And we wanted to know, well, where did that happen? Well, here is our form, our starting form. We've only got one constructor in there, which is this guy. We say, okay, it must be called somewhere. At the end of you should be able to say, okay, let me find all the references to that, and here it is. And that reference, which I clicked on, is in main, which should not surprise you. Remember, we said main is where you enter your application. Those first two lines, you don't even have to worry about them. They have to do with graphical stuff. But you say, oh, here it is, new form start by default. So this is where, and it kind of makes sense that as soon as you enter, once again, forget about line 17 and 18, what's the first thing that you do? Boom, you create that form, okay? And you create the default version of it. The default version of it is going to be the form that will have all those properties that you set, okay? Well, not even that, really. But what it does, it calls the constructor, and then you can go see what the constructor does. You can see that the first thing it does is initialize component. If you follow initialize component, you'll see that that's where all those properties you set for your control, their location, their size, the text on them, and so forth, it's all done in initialize component. So right here, we create the form. Okay, that form will be at first the default form, who knows what that looks like, but then it calls initialize component, which will then go ahead and take care of initializing everything. Okay, that is what that is, and then once you have your form, because what this thing does, it instantiates the form, and it returns a form start object for you, and the application is static class. Okay, so remember what you said about static class, there's really no object of that, but you can invoke the methods of that class by simply giving the name of the class, application, dot, and any method that is given in that static class. Just like the math class, okay, is static, so there is no math object, okay, but all the methods that come with the math class, you can access with dot, and you can ask for sine, cosine, tangent, log, whatever is in the math class library. So in any case, application has a run method, and what it needs to be given a form. And then it knows how to put it up and hook it up with all the event sources, and that's it. I mean, your entire application, in a sense, is right there, where you create the form and you run the form. And after that, it's all event driven. Events are sent to your form, and if you have event handlers, those are called by the event. That's it. I mean, you know, in that first quiz, what do the teachers want you to understand? Concepts. Concepts is pretty simple here. Yeah, what does a Windows form application do? It's simple. It creates a form in which you put a whole bunch of control, but it creates a form, and then it puts it up and hooks up the events to it. That's it. And what you have to provide is a bunch of event handlers, so that whenever a particular event occurs, boom, you go, you handle it, you're done. Oh, someone clicked on this button, turn this light on. Someone moved the scroll bar, increase the temperature, whatever, okay? But that's it. Okay, so we're creating this, creates a form. Now, this is just that initial form, okay, the form start, which is this guy. So the application creates a form like this, calls initialize component to set up all the properties, like the dates, associated with this date time ticker, the date associated with this date time ticker. It has, this form has also associated with it an open file dialog. The properties of that open file dialog are set, like the file name, the filters, the initial directory, the default extension, all those things that we did, that we set up, all of that gets taken care of with the initialized component. Okay, and that gives us that. Then we decided when we click on load, we bring up the open file dialog, we select the file, and then we answer via the form, the file OK event handler. So here's file OK. Now the question is, when you only have one file, okay, remember project one, all you did is you got the file name and that told you, hey, I can go load my file. I go, I grab my data, I crunch it, and I get back a list of candlesticks, okay? Once we have the list of candlesticks, what did we have to do? Huh? Filter it based on what? The date. Where was the information about the date stored? Because we have a filter function, okay? And you had to pass the list of candlesticks so that it would know what it's filtering, and you had to provide it with the starting and ending dates. Where did it get the starting and ending date? Well, from the two date time pickers, okay? So you say to yourself, now we're going to have multiple files. I want to create a new form for each file, okay? That new form, once it comes up, what would I like it to automatically go and do? Filter base, or now if you say filter the list, that means that that form would have had to have been given the list of candlesticks. That would have had to have been the very first form that would say, I have 20 files, let me read a file open. I gave you that the last time to make you think. There's actually a better way to do it. How about our first form, simply get the names, and when we create the new form, we pass it the name, as well as the start date and the end date, okay? And we tell the new form, hey buddy, here's the file name, the full path, here's the start date, here's the end date. Sayonara, okay? Bye. What then should the new form do once it's got the name and the start end date? What should it do? All the stuff you did in project one. You already have the sequence of things to do in project one. So, how do we get that to happen when you get the new form? Exactly. We now say we are going to have another constructor for the form, not just the default one, okay? For our chart display form, we're going to create our own constructor, but that constructor is going to create the form and pass the form those three pieces of information. The full path name, the start date, the end date, okay? Now, in that new constructor, you should also say, hey, what I have is the equivalent of what in project one we had when someone had clicked on the file and we got the file okay. Because at that point, we had the name of the file, except it was in the open file dialog, and we had our start and end date. So really what we did in file okay is we want to do it now in the new constructor. Because the new constructor will have the file name, it will have the start date and the end date. Does that make sense, or is anybody lost? Or I gather those two there must already know the answer because they're not paying attention, and I will make it part of the quiz just because of that. So next time, there will be a quiz, and it will be about what they weren't paying attention to. You can see it as a good thing. When people don't listen, I'm going to tell you, such and such and such, we're not paying attention, there will be a quiz on what I just covered. Okay? And what that means, that the rest of you who are paying attention should be going, yes, I know that, I'll get 10 on this quiz. For those others who weren't paying attention, well, you're gonna have to figure it out. So, note to self. And you can do the same, by the way, saying there will be a quiz next time, and it's gonna be on constructor and what we covered there. And you should be absolutely fine, because you're going to understand what I'm gonna talk about. And if not, you will be asking questions because you know, hey, there's gonna be a quiz, I need to know. I mean, I want you to get a 10 on the quiz, but it's gonna be one of those really mean quizzes. There'll be one question. You get it or you don't get it, 0 or 10. Okay? All right, so what we want to do, we want to create a new constructor, okay, for our display form. So let me make sure I have, this is my form right here. This is my form chart display. This is the constructor that gets called when you want to create that new form on which you're going to show the chart. Do we understand that? And for each file name, we want to create one of those forms, but we don't want to do the chart display default. We're going to have another constructor and look at what that constructor looks like. Okay? I already kind of went and did something on that. It's a constructor that's going to take the original file path. It's going to take a date for the starting date and for the ending date. Okay? Now you might say, all right, now we'll look at the code in a second, but you say, where would I call that? So, and just to show you how it makes things really easy, here's our file OK code now. What are we doing in the file OK code? When, and you get that when the user has selected one or more files. Do we agree? If the user doesn't select a file, like maybe selects a file and then says cancel, I changed my mind, file OK will not be fired. So the only way you get in this is if the file or more was chosen. So you don't have to check, for instance, are there any file that were chosen? You don't have to do that. You know you're here because at least one file was selected. Okay, so what do I do here? I simply say for each var file name in open file dialog file name. What essentially is that mean? What are we doing in that mean? Yes, go ahead.
Each file that you select.
That's right. You're going to the name of each file that was selected, and you're getting the full path name. And what do I do here? I say, I want to create a new chart display form, let's call it F, and I say it's going to be a new form, chart display, but I don't want to use the default one, okay? I want to create a new display that will have the file name of the current file we're looking at, and the start date, well, what is that going to be? That's going to be from the date time picker, or the start date time picker. Take its value, and for the end time or end date, we're going to use the date time picker end date value. That's it. I mean, this is all that file OK does. Say, oh, you've selected a bunch of files, no problem. I'm going to get the file name, I'm going to get the starting date, ending date that are in here, okay? So this guy and this guy, and I'm just going to create a new form of this type. Let's see, not this one, we no longer do this. And the new form is going to be a new form chart display, which is this guy. So we're going to create a new form, which is going to look like this, although that we still have to fix because it's a chart, we have to set all the elements. Yes?
Could you go back to the code for a second?
You want me to go back
Yes, please.
to which thing?
To the constructor.
The constructor, okay, bear with me. Right there.
You have load and display there. What is the
Yeah.
difference between
When
calling
we're
load?
upload and display, remember, I've been messing around with this thing, and we're gonna work together on getting this to work correctly.
Mhm.
Okay? But essentially, if you just look at this code, one thing to always know is that given the framework we have, every constructor of something derived from form needs to do one thing, always. Call that method of the form. The base class says, hey, if you're gonna build on top of me, yeah, you can go do your thing, but remember, always allow me, the base class, to initialize all the components. Any controls you put and all that stuff, we're gonna take care of it. So you always put that here,
Mhm.
okay? Then, and you can go look at that code, you can see what it does. It's the one that sets all the components, their location, their size, their tags, and so forth and so on, okay? But then, here's what we wanna do. We wanna get the file path, and I set the file path to be the original file path that was passed to me. That's a bit redundant, but I wanted to explain, okay, that's the file path. For the value of the date time picker of the new form, because remember, this is gonna construct the new form. So in the new form, we want to set its date time picker value to whatever start date and its end date. So when we create the new form, which is the form that looks like that, we're gonna set this guy's value and this guy's value to the start date and end date. Why? Because remember, when you filtered your filter function, where did it get the information as to the starting and ending date? It got them from the two date time pickers. So we need to set the date time picker's value to the appropriate value so that when you call filter, the one we've already written and everything, so you don't have to rewrite everything, filter will know to go, oh, let me go to this guy and to this guy to know the two filtering dates, okay? Is that may not be totally clear to people. If you have a question about why is it like that, time to ask, okay? Because remember, if you look at your own code, because you may have done it differently, if you did it differently, you may have to adjust how you do things here, okay? By the way, since I just created an event, which I didn't want to do. Okay, that's a way to check how you fix that. If you have done something like this, created an event, don't delete it yourself. Go to the properties, okay, and go to the event, and I don't want anything about clicking on the chart. So what you do, you actually go to that event that you accidentally have generated, delete it here, and then when you go back to your code, you will find that that event that was here before is gone. It knows to take care of it. And it's also gone from the event being attached to the form. Whereas if you had said, oh, I don't want that, then you just delete it, then you get an error. Why? Because that event handler is still mentioned somewhere else. But by doing it to the designer, it knows to remove that event handler from everywhere where it could. Okay. All right, so we took care of that little issue. And if I now look at, okay, what's going to happen, it's not going to be load and display. Presumably, it should be load ticker. Wouldn't you agree?
Mhm.
After all, we will have the name, everything that we need. So how about saying, hey, really what we want here is load the ticker, but the ticker needs a name, and that would be that full file path. I mean, let's think about it. I don't know if it's gonna work quite yet, but right now, all that we're doing in our new constructor, we say, okay, we have our file name, okay, from that original startup of this form. You agree that we have the start and end date. We need to have those so that when someone clicks on the file, we know to read the entire file, but in order to display, we need to know what start and ending date we're interested in. If not, what would happen is that when the new form comes up, we'd have to somehow go on that form and say what we want. So instead, right there in this input form, we set our start date, end date, we say load stop. You can change those dates if you want, doesn't matter. When you hit load stop, it says, okay, I have all the files that you want, and what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to create a new form, okay, and you can see it, file okay. And I'm going to start. Oh, it's in the other one. Okay, in file okay, we saw it earlier, we go to each one of the file names, and what we do, we go invoke this constructor, passing it the file path and everything. So right there, we have a stop reader. We're gonna need a stop reader because that's what does the reading. Okay. We'll need the file path, we'll need the 2-date time picker value, and we just say load file path. Okay, let's see if that actually works. All we have to do at this point is say, let's see if we just run this thing, what will happen. So hopefully it compiles. If not, we have a problem. Oh, no, it compiled, it's running. We now have our input file. Now I have already set it up, as I've explained to you. I like to have a good date already set so that I don't have to go in every time I run my code, have to change the date. So everything is set. I can say load the stock. It's got this. I'm going to say this month and this week. Okay, just so that I have two of them. I'm gonna say open. When I say open, it says, ooh, here's file okay. And file okay says, hey, how many file names do I have? It says I have 2 file names, okay? And if I wanted to see what those 2 file names are, okay, I can ask for the view, this enumerator view, and it says, yep, here are the 2 file names that we have. So we know everything is working fine so far, and all we want to do is for each one of those file names, we want to create a new chart, okay? And here we go. It's going to blow up because I didn't set my chart properly. So let's step into the constructor. First thing it does is components. This is another issue. We are actually in the constructor, but let's go in further by stepping over. And here we are, going into the constructor. First thing you want to do, initialize the component. It went ahead, it initialized all the components. That's all the controls and everything. By the way, as we're constructing the form here, it's not visible, okay? It's not visible. Then the next thing we want to do, we say let's create a stop reader. We're going to need the stop reader to do the loading and stuff, okay? Then let's set into our member variable, because this thing here has 3 member variables. It's got the file path. In my class, I'm going to save that for later. I have my candlestick, which is my list of candlesticks, which right now is null, and my path file right now is null. And we have a stop reader, which we just created, so it says you have a stop reader available. Then I'm going to say step over. So now my file path is this one. My start date is going to be set. The value is January 1st, 2024. If I look at the value of this one here, it says March, but now when I end date, yeah, it's going to take 2 days, which is, at that point, we have all the information we need. We have our file path, our start date, end date. So let's see what load ticker is going to do. If I step into load ticker, here it is. And remember, I just grabbed those from project 1. They're exactly the code from project 1. Okay, so you have to make sure that you name your things the same way. And what we have here, we go read the data and list of candlesticks. There's 130 of them. So it went ahead and it read all the data. Then we look at, remember, we had to look at the first and second candlestick to check the date, see if the dates were in the proper order. So I grabbed the first candlestick by saying, go to element 0 of the list. Second candlestick is element 1, and then I just ask if the dates are in increasing order. If not, which they aren't, boom, you reverse your list. Okay, now that I've done that, I can return my list of candlesticks. So remember, the load ticker part, that's all that it does at this point, and there we are, okay? So after we've loaded the ticker, what else would we want to do? We would want to do the filtering, okay? After we've done, so if you look over here, remember you were asking about load and display? You can see that now, oh, that's what we would have been doing. So now you can understand that I can, instead of being here, doing this, I can stop here and I can say load and display. Load and display. And load and display should know what to do. So let's rerun this. I'll do it very quickly. That way we can see what happens. Here we are, load stock. I'm going to do it for 2 stocks. Hit enter. Hey, I'm going to create the constructor, so let's just step over it. Initialize, new stock reader, And now I'm going to go into load and display. Load and display, what's the first thing it does? Okay.
It's yours.
I don't know why I have this thing over here. It's not really okay. So here, in display, you know the ticker, and put that number in the stick. Okay, about that. And if I ask how many candlesticks I have, it says it's up to 130. The next thing we do is go to the candlestick. Now, remember to go to the candlestick. See, I'm getting the date, the start and end date on my date time picker. That's why I had stuffed the information into 2 days and picker.
Yeah,
That, I filtered,